This computer. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Gentle Birth podcast. So I'd like to introduce you today to a new, well, not a new doula. I would say Kristen Schell. I'll make sure I just had a conversation with Kristen about, I'm going to call her Kirsten at some point today. So my apologies in advance. But Kristen has recently presented at the Doula birth conference on working with moms with disabilities. So I wanted to kind of jump right in there and tell me, how was the conference, first of all?
It was really great. It was my first time attending the donor conference. And I found out it was their first conference in person in a couple of years. So it was really nice. I learned a lot. It was definitely like trying to get a lot of information from a fire hose. So
Isn't it?
it was really helpful, though. I'm already incorporating what I learned into my practice. So yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, I didn't get to go this year, and it was I'm in need of an in-person conference very soon. But I'm thinking like Lamaze was supposed to be in, I think, Ohio next year. I'm like can we go to like Hawaii or Mexico or somewhere,
Right.
because then I will definitely put it on my calendar, and it wouldn't get bumped. Definitely not if it was somewhere in the sun. But yeah, I just saw some of the clips from the conference, and yeah, had a bit of FOMO, because it's like there's so much information over those couple of days. And I know, like, I've sat there and I probably missed half the conference because I've been taking so many notes. And then you come back and there's this, it's almost like, conference hangover, where it's like, okay, now it's back to after spending days with like-minded birth professionals, and then you're kind of back to reality. And
Yeah. It's almost like you kind of get a birth high being around other professionals that have
yes,
the same passion as you and the birth and improving society's perception of birth and improving birth outcomes overall. And it's like really cool. So
yeah, it is, because it's, when you're in your own community and you meet up with other doulas and birth professionals, there's always that element of, we've got good work to do here. But when you're in that conference with the energy levels, and it's really, you just come away on that high, and but
yeah,
then you gotta come there.
it was actually really cool when we were leaving to go to the airport after the conference. There was a person that came to us because we had our donut like gear on, and
Right.
she said, I work at that hotel, and your group is like the best group I ever had like come to our hotel. You were all
Lovely.
really kind and engaging and like warm people and stuff like that. I'm like, yeah, let's do less for you.
I tell you, well, I mean, it's lucky it wasn't the other way. If it had been a bad review, like, okay, are
Yeah.
we in the right kind of work here? But Kristen, tell me a little bit about your journey to becoming a doula.
Mm-hmm. So I didn't really know what doulas was. I started out as I graduated from college to be a web and graphic designer. So I was a web and graphic designer for a couple of years, and then I was on Pinterest for whatever reason. And I saw birth photography photos, and I was like, wow, they are really
Oh.
beautiful. And I loved it because it was growing up, birth was something to be afraid of, like something really painful. Because I remember hearing stories from my mom saying, like,
Mm.
I wanted an epidural, but it was too late, that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
I remember thinking as a child that I just wanted cesarean. I don't want to deal with the pain. Like, I don't want to need that. But
Mm.
when I saw the birth photos, I saw how birth could be something beautiful. So I posted on my Facebook and like, I saw those photos. I would love to do that someday. And my sister-in-law commented it, and she said, oh, you can do my birth. And I was like, cool. She wasn't pregnant. But a few months later, she told me that she was pregnant and she wanted me to be at her birth. And I was like, oh, cool. So
Lovely.
at the time, I was doing a little bit photography on the side as like a wedding photographer, family photographer, things like that. But then once I documented that birth, I think it was 2016. Then I was hooked. I was like, oh my gosh, this is what I want to do the rest of my life. But I couldn't
Yeah.
pursue it full time because it's kind of hard being on call. And at the
Yes.
time, my husband was in graduate school and I wasn't being breadwinner with health insurance and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But once he was done with school, we moved to Michigan. We were living in Pennsylvania at the time. We moved to Michigan. He was like, okay, it's your turn to do what you want to do. And I was like, oh, shucks.
Lovely.
So I started pursuing birth photography full time. And at that time, I already had my first child. And I knew about doulas because they mentioned it in the childbirth education class. But I was like, those are for the hippies. The hippie moms, crunchy
I
moms,
know.
whatever.
Yeah. That's what I thought too.
But then I decided I have no idea why I did this. But I decided to take a doula training course over the weekend just to understand what doulas do, because I figured I was seeing them in the birth space. So I wanted to understand the role better. So when I did the training, I was like, oh my God, this is what I want to do. So I started doing both. And I love it because as a birth doula, I support them, the birthing person and the partner in the birth space, to help them feel more empowered about the process. And then as a birth photographer, I help them remember that experience and what a badass they were. So that's why I love doing both. And that's important because when you're like in labor land, you kind of focus inward, which hopefully you are because it's the labor flow state. So you forget a lot of things. So when you look at the photos, you like remember. I used to show the photos by sending them an email, but then I started doing it in person. You can see the reaction, you can see the transformation on their face when they get so excited, they get so proud, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know that happened," or whatever. So, and then after I took the training, I realized that I could have benefited from a doula for my first birth. Even though I had a wonderful labor support team with my partner and with my husband and my sister. So with my second child, I hired a doula, and I'm really glad I did. So that's my journey in a nutshell.
And I was about to warn you, this journey can take you into further. Let your partner know this, because it was the same for me, having started off and hearing this thing about doulas. I had a doula at my first birth, and I always say this: I was probably your worst doula client. Like the doula, like when you're working with doula clients who get it, who understand why I'm hiring a doula, and who want to really utilize this tool and everything that the doula brings. And but then we ended up I did not utilize my doula as much as I should have, and going to the meetings thinking, this is for the crunchy moms, this is not for me from Dublin, Ireland. We don't do that kind of thing. But I was living in California at the time, so it was definitely more of a thing. But I ended up with going from doula work, and then getting more and more deeper into it, and then eventually going back to school to do my midwifery. So it's we have a saying in Ireland: in for a penny, in for a pound. So just a word of warning that your journey is probably going to continue into
last year I just recently got trained as a Lamaze childbirth educator, so I'm starting the childbirth education journey just because I've seen how it impacted some of my clients' journey. I think about the quality childbirth education course. So I was like, and not everybody wants to hire a doula, and that's okay. But I feel like everybody needs to know their options and feel empowered about the childbirth education, the process, and not like approach it in fear, but rather in like excitement. And like so they can make informed decisions and stuff like that. So
and what I'm kind of seeing lately, and I think it's a kind of came over from COVID, is that there's a lot of parents that, because so many hospitals went to virtual training, who kind of like did the virtual online thing, and just like, I could have got that on YouTube, or coming back and saying, I'm not taking a class, I'm going to do it on YouTube. And I know everyone watching or listening to this who's in the birth business is going, no, don't learn from YouTube. There are some amazing birth professionals on YouTube, but there's a lot of really misinformation and unhelpful information, I think, in YouTube. And I think, finding a quality class, and of course Lamaze has, for forever being kind of at that pinnacle of, you want quality, you want evidence-based, that you cannot go wrong with the Lamaze branding, and it's so well known. So can you tell me a little bit about have you ever been at a birth as a photographer and felt that the doula part of you wants to, because I would imagine they're both very different roles. And so what's the conversation you're having with the parents ahead of time to help them understand that, yes, I am a doula, but on the day as a birth photographer, like, how does that usually go? Or how do you help parents understand the difference?
Yeah, so usually when parents hire me just as a birth photographer, they just want the photos, they want the support. And I don't know if it's because they don't understand what a doula does. So I try to explain the difference between the two roles. But it is hard for me sometimes to stand by and watch things, especially when sometimes a way a provider is speaking to them, they may not understand that
Right.
there's actually more options that what is being presented, or just because it's the first time giving birth, they don't know anything else, or whatever. But then it's hard to take the doula out of me too, though. Even when I was a birth photographer, I still did like low-key doula stuff. I still made sure they drank water and had snacks or whatever. And but I do try to talk about it, and it was hard for me to do it separately. So now I actually changed my packaging to include both. So so I don't have to feel like I have to choose only one part of me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it is. I find it difficult as well when now it's been, I haven't been to a birth in about a year at this point, but it's hard for me to leave the midwife part of me outside when I'm in a birth with parents, because especially if I know they're getting wrong information, or I've had a couple of situations over the years where I have seen, I've been kind of glancing at the CTG, or I've been glancing at the blood pressure and thinking, something's not right here. And how do you bring that up without, scaring the parents, and without, annoying the provider as well? And usually I won't say anything about the fact that I'm a midwife, because everybody is just a little bit weird
it's
for a
like
minute.
find that scope of practice. So as a birth photographer, I'm there to document things as they happen. I'm not supposed to be jumping in, whereas as a doula, that's a different scope of practice. I can help the parents and advocate in their spaces and educate them or whatever, or try to help them the labor flow state. But it is definitely wearing two different hats. So it can be challenging at times.
No, it has to be. And then as another part of your business, you have a pottery business as well. So tell us about, and you can, and before we wrap up, you're going to tell us where we can buy all your lovely pottery.
So I started as birth photography. Well, first I did pottery because I wanted something that would take me out of the house to spend time with people that I don't live with. My husband did something like that. He does disc golf 1 day a week. So I was like getting kind of jealous on how it was helping his mental health. So I'm like, I'm going to do pottery class. So I started taking pottery class last year in the fall. And it was hand building. And then in January, I started taking wheel throwing class, and I loved it. But obviously I can't get away from birth. So I started making birth theme mugs. So they're like mugs with baby with placenta or boobs for breastfeeding. There's also some with the baby in the uterus and things like that. And I do that, and I decided to do that as like a birth equity fund. So 50% of every mug goes towards my birth equity fund. And what that fund is being used for is to bridge the gap to families who can't afford my full fee. So I get my fee at a lower price, but the fund makes up for the gap. If the fee is
very
good,
good.
I can still get paid a sustainable ways, because I want to make sure I don't like burn out and then don't serve any more families. That doesn't really help anyone. So this way I make sure the work I do is sustainable. So I've been starting to sell them on my Etsy shop. So I started selling them in August, and I think I raised like $600 so far.
Very good.
So that's pretty cool. And I'm still working pretty hard on trying to make more mugs for the Christmas season, so that because I know a lot of people have been asking me, even at the donor conference, they're like, I don't know what they did the birthday marks. So I was like, they're like, we tried to go to SD shop, but there isn't anything left. I'm like, I'm sorry, it's only me. And these mugs take like 3 to 5 weeks to make. They take a while because you have to throw it, then wait for it to get hardened, and you have to trim one side, add the handle, then you wait until it's leather hard, and I do all the carving. Then you have to fire it. Then after it's fired, you glaze it, and then you fire it again. So it's a whole process.
It's like birth. It takes patience.
Exactly.
You cannot rush the process, or you'll end up with a broken cup,
Yeah.
So other than your pottery, what other ways do you, I guess, try to avoid burnout? Because it is a huge issue within the birth doula community. And I was a donut trainer for many years, and it's so disheartening. Well, it's so exciting when you have a room full of doulas that everyone's passionate and excited to be there. And then you connect in with them then after the training, and it's, 6 months have gone by, a year have gone by, and they haven't done anything, or they've been to a birth that was really traumatic for them, and it's had them kind of rethinking everything. And even doulas who do really well and have the business background, because that's always a kind of a tricky part of it as well, the business background of it. Coming away from births feeling like it's too much. I can't stand by and watch, I think, what a lot of us would consider to be obstetric violence or disrespect towards moms and partners. And what other ways do you think, I guess, doula organizations can support doulas to look after their emotional wellness and mental health? Like, what was there? I'm just wondering if was there any discussion even at the conference about how doulas can support themselves really to continue on this work? Because if you're gone and I'm gone and the rest of the doulas are we just, because it's so difficult, we're, what are parents supposed to do next?
Yeah, I don't think there was much talk about that. I mean, there was more talk about how to level up our fitness to the next level, and like as far as like advocacy at like the state level and for our clients and things like that. I don't know. I think one thing that Doula does well is that it kind of helps connect doulas with each other on their like online platform and in person and stuff like that. But what I found helpful is that I have to do a lot of the work for myself because I have to connect with the local doulas around me, and not all of them are trained by Doula. So obviously I have to open up my, my training expectations or whatever.
Yes.
And I find that if you have a local community, it's helpful because you can kind of give each other a heads up about certain providers or whatever.
Yeah.
But you also can't make a judgment because we don't know if this is like a repeating pattern or if it's just that one time, you know what I mean? Because sometimes we have bad days too. So, but I have a group of local doulas that I can like call and count on to process a difficult experience. And also I'm a strong believer in therapy. So I do therapy to maintain my mental health and make sure I don't burn out. And then I have to like remind myself that there are beautiful births out there. And I also process the birth experience, whether it's like, did I handle that correctly? What can I do differently to make that to prevent that from happening? Because sometimes it's going to happen no matter what, but like just to know how to better advocate for a client differently or prepare a client ahead of time with that kind of situation, just in case it happens. But there's only so much you can do. So it is tricky for sure. Yeah.
And where you're based, how are the hospitals? Are they welcoming of doulas? Or I'm sure it's probably similar to most areas. You have the providers who are amazing, and you have the providers who aren't so amazing, and you do learn their patterns. I think for me personally, it's one of the biggest advantages of hiring a doula is to get the inside track on what happens at your particular hospital. Well, it's at least it opens everyone's eyes to, okay, here's kind of what can happen here, and this is what this my provider is known for, and you're also positioning it in a way that's not going to, that it's you're leaving it up to the parents to connect the dots and ask the right questions so that they can, decide for themselves what makes sense to stay at this hospital with this provider or to change. So in where you are in Michigan, are you seeing a lot of receptivity to doulas, or does it depend on the doula? And
yeah, I think it depends on the doula, and also depends on the hospital and the nurse, like everywhere else. I live in Benton Harbor, so it's kind of like it's not rural, but it's not city. There is kind of a small town, so usually I have to drive an hour to go a major hospital. So I'll have to drive an hour to Grand Rapids or Kalamazoo or South Bend. But I also have some hospitals in where I live, which is 15 minutes away, and one that's 35 minutes away. So I'm finding that some of them are like, yeah, let's do it. Let's do this doula thing. And others are like kind of skeptical. But I've heard that from other experienced doulas that there's some like doulas that kind of give doulas a bad name. So that's why providers are mistrustful. I just kind of unfortunate because there are some nurses and doctors in the hospital. There are no, give them a bad name, but it doesn't stop people from going to those hospitals. So it's kind of like, yes, we're not, doulas are awesome, but we're not exceptional. I mean, I don't know if that makes sense. So I try to establish a good relationship. When I enter in the room, I introduce myself to the nurse and like the doctors or the midwife, and then try to like be collaborative, because hopefully when we're collaborative, obviously the birth vibe is so much better and everything. So and I try to like thank them afterwards, be like, thank you so much for being here, that kind of thing, to try to like help see how doulas and providers do not always have to be at odds with each other. Hopefully we're trying to center the birth experience in the partner and like caring about how they are birthing, because it may be another day for the providers and the nurses, but this is the day they're going to remember. The parents are going to remember the rest of their life, because it's the day the child was born. So it is tricky. I know it's one of those things that it takes time to build relationships and trust with all of those, and it's tricky because you're doing a little bit here and there. It's not like I have one hospital that I'm building a relationship with, So I know it's going to take time. So yeah, but it is cool. It is actually kind of encouraging when I go to some births and the nurse is like, "You're fantastic. I would love to see you here around here more often." It's like it works, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So,
and that goes such a long way as well, for when you have even one nurse advocate for you that is spreading the word, saying, hey, these doulas are great, especially if a nurse doesn't have experience with doulas, because we had quite a lot of resistance in Ireland when doulas first started going into the hospitals, because and actually even today some midwives will still feel like, well, that's my job, the emotional support. And I get that, as a midwife, I want to be all things to that mother, but I can't be, and I have to recognize that within my role, I have priorities. And when you see a doula coming in with the parents, it's like, yes, because it means that, they're going to be well supported, and I can get on my paperwork and the clinical care and everything. And I know they've got, that doula is going to hold that space for them. And it's but having even one advocate can really sell the benefits of doulas.
My little sister is actually a labor delivery nurse up in like an hour north of me, and she says when she sees a doula, she gets excited, but she knows other nurses on her own floor that don't get excited when there's a when there's a doula. So I'm not really sure if there's mistrust, or if it's somebody acting outside their scope as a doula, or I don't know. There's a lot of work we have to do, definitely, to try to make it so when people say, "Oh, there's a doula room," there's excitement rather than going, "Oh," that kind of thing.
It's like, great, we've got extra hands and extra support. It's and do you have any volunteer doula programs? I'm not necessarily volunteer, but doula programs within the hospitals in Michigan? Like in California, and I think Oregon as well, and Washington. There are hospitals that have connected in with the doulas, so that doulas are paid, but they're not staff, but they're available to support a laboring mom who comes in. So is there anything like that happening in Michigan, or?
So in our area, no, there's been talk by some our hospital about like a hospitals-based doula program, but nothing really has come out of it yet. There are some hospital-based doula programs over on the other side of Michigan where 40% of the birth happens. And there are some of them. I don't really know much about it to know like how it works. So yeah. But I know that I've heard of it from other states. I know when I was talking to some doulas at the donor conference, I was really curious about the hospital-based collaboration doula collaboration program works, because I get nervous about that, because I want to make sure that my boss is the client, not the hospital. Because I want to make sure my clients is working in their best interest, not in the hospital's best interest. So so I think that's like the tricky part, is like, how do we make sure the collaboration works the best in the client's interests? So but I've heard from some doulas that they do work really well. So it should have to be set up in a way that could be beneficial for everybody involved. So
and that's it. And it takes time. It really is. I was involved in setting one up in California a couple of years ago, and there's a huge amount of trust building to be established with the hospitals. But I think it took a while. This was probably 2 years to actually, like, just trying to get people in rooms for meetings, because people are on different shifts, and but I think it does lend itself, doulas as a profession, so much more credibility when you see, okay, so the hospitals in our area, they're all about doulas and whatever. So, and then it's good for doulas and parents, because they're hearing more about these other these programs. Have you ever worked with your sister? What would happen if you showed up at a hospital and your sister was there? How would that?
It's on my bucket list. So I have a client who is going to deliver at her hospital. So I'm like, I hope the stars align that she'll be in the same shift, because it'd be awesome, because we have a special kind of relationship already, because we're both born deaf. So like I think it'd be really cool if we can work well together. I know we would. She's passionate about birth, and so am I. So and we have a secret language ever since we were babies, but we can like lip read with each other with our voice, so we can like communicate like, what do you think of this provider, or something like that, or like, can I have this or that, and we can lip read it to each other. So I think it'd be awesome. So
that I always say that would be so much fun. It would be, and I think it would be great for great energy for your clients as well. So will you tell me a little bit about growing up with a disability and coming into doula work? I'd love to hear more about. So
I was born deaf both years, and then I got hearing aids, and then when I was 7 years old, I got cochlear implants, just 1 year, because at the time it was really common to get 1 year, and then I got the other one in like my mid-20s. I did not. My parents are born hearing. So I went to an oral deaf school from 1 year old until I was in 5th grade. So then I was mainstreamed to a hearing school in 5th grade. And then after that, it was fine. I don't know. For me, it's not that different to grow up disabled, because that's all I know. So I don't know. Kind of like somebody saying like, oh, I'm sorry you were born with brown hair. It's like, but why? That's what I don't know. I think sometimes it can be challenging to be a doula, because you want to be the best client, the best doula for your client. But it is hard sometimes when my disability kind of can create barriers. But I find ways working around it. So like, for example, when I go to the hospital, usually when you go to the labor delivery floor, you have to like ring the doorbell, and then they say, who's this? But like, sometimes it's not very clear. So it's like, wow. And I'm like, so I have a guess of like, say my client's name and room number, and say, I'm the doula, Kristen Schell, and then they let me in. So I'm like, okay, that's the workaround I do, because I assume that's what they're asking, hoping that's the right
to
whatever they're asking. And then It was challenging during COVID because all of the providers were wearing masks, which is totally understandable. But it made my job a little more challenging. So I had depend more on my hearing at the time. I do better when I can do hearing and speech reading at the same time. So, but then I would like, if I wasn't sure, then I would clarify with my client. So did the doctor say, or the midwife say this or that? And then they say, yes, that's blah, blah, blah. And then we talk about it more. And they're like, I'm not sure. That's not good. They should ask clarifying questions to know what they say.
Yes.
So, but I feel like my disability made me a strong advocate because I already had to advocate for myself in a world that's not made for me. Because the world is heavily catered to hearing people, which is understandable because most of the world can hear. So I think that translates well to doula work because you have to like learn how to advocate for your clients in forms of asking questions or presenting options and things like that. So yeah, I think also it gave me the ability to like read body language pretty well because I have to like look at people's faces to like lip read them. So I can like pick up the micro expressions and things like that. So I think that helps with like collaboration and things like that. So
yeah. I mean, whatever about doulas having the inside track, you really have the inside track when like being able to like just subtle micro expressions as well. Because when talking to moms in gentle birth, you know, we're talking about the fact that, you know, these pregnancy hormones make you more aware, but it's mostly at a subconscious level that, you know, if your provider is saying something to you, but there's a disconnect between what they're saying and how they appear. That's your mind is giving you the signal. There's not authenticity here. Something's not jiving. So if your midwife is, you know, going through your birth preferences and says, oh, yes, but in fact, she's rolling her eyes on the inside, that we do, like, you know, pregnant when we pick up on these things, and it's just, you know, it's a hormonal thing, but we don't necessarily know it's happening. We just have this feeling of unease that something's not quite right. And I think, you know, I think we do experience that more than we really admit to just in our daily lives when we talking to somebody that we're just, there's the connection is a little off, and we're not gelling. Like there's a disconnect in chemistry. And I think, in pregnancy, listen to that voice that's telling you there's a disconnect somewhere, because it is, you know, through, you know, evolution, we have, you know, we're protective of ourselves when we're pregnant. And these little, you know, hacks that our subconscious has to like, oh yeah, we want to make sure we keep an eye on this person here because their words and actions aren't aligning. But when you were considering going into doula work, were you at all concerned that your disability would impact your work, or wasn't it such a big deal for you because this has been your life? And it's just
I don't think so, because I'm like, I found a way to like work around the obstacles or whatever. So it's just another thing in my life. So just kind of used to it. So yeah, I wasn't very concerned. The only thing I knew that I had to accommodate for was if somebody calls me at 2:00 in the morning, I'm like, how am I going to make sure I hear their phone call? Because I have to check off my night cochlear plan to like charge them overnight. So I bought a watch that like has that buzzing me awake. So that's how I do it. And then I imagine that at the consult for potential clients, I mentioned that because I assume that's a question they're going to have in the back of their mind, which is understandable. So I tell them that I have a watch to buzz me awake. I also put a ringer on as a backup plan for like my hearing husband to wake me up. But I always wake up before he does, even though he's the hearing one. So and then so that's what I do to get around that. I know that sometimes my disability might be prevent some people from hiring me, but that's okay because I'm not a doula for everybody. Yeah. And I'd rather have somebody who trusts in my ability 100% and to feel comfortable with me as a doula, and that's okay. if they trust in me, then my disability is not going to be a problem. It's just a thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. I agree. And it's, do you have a lot of especially moms with who, and correct me, I'm trying to be politically correct here, who can't hear or are deaf, or do you find that those women are reaching out to you specifically? Because I know when I saw a research paper a couple of years ago looking at women's experiences who were deaf and giving birth, and the amount of birth trauma, because they felt they were not listened. They were people like were shouting at them and like raising their voice instead of trying to speak more clearly, and it was quite distressing, some of the feedback these women gave based on their experiences. So are you finding that women are looking for you for this kind of support?
Yeah, so that's actually the surprising thing. So I've had some disabled clients before. They usually are like neurospicy, or they have like some kind of chronic illness. I've had one other deaf person. She happened to be my sister. So it was not a problem. But the deaf and hard of hearing community, there's such a spectrum. So when I say like deaf, there's two different variations. There's like a lowercase d and there's a capital D. So capital D is like the deaf community that is that communicate through American Sign Language or Irish Sign Language or whatever they are, the sign language, and then that's like the part of their culture and then their identity and stuff. I was not raised to understand ASL, and I was not given access to that language, so I kind of feel bummed about that because I feel like I kind of missed out that part of me.
Okay, yeah, because I just assumed you would. And I'm making assumptions. I assume that you would know.
Yes, everybody, like when people find out I'm deaf, they're like, "Oh, you know sign language." I'm like, "I know, but not really." Okay. I'm like, "Sorry to disappoint you twice," but then I started taking sign language as an adult. But I know enough to like carry on a conversation, but not like super fast. And then there's like deaf, which is a lowercase d, which is like people who identify deaf, like medically deaf. So that's what I identify as, because English, speaking is my main language. So we're kind of like that in between world where we're not like considered like deaf, but we're not considered like hearing either. So it's like a weird place to be. And then there's the hard of hearing community, and those are people who are not like profoundly deaf. So those are like people with mild hearing loss, like wearing hearing aids and stuff like that. Sometimes people use the term hearing impaired, but the deaf community, the lowercase and the uppercase do not like that term, because would you like being called deaf impaired? It's like, this doesn't sound nice.
Yes.
so
okay.
Yeah, so the all encompassing term is just like deaf and hard of hearing community. Yeah, so in my area there, I haven't really run into much like deaf people like me. Usually if there's like hard of hearing people, they're like older population that's not, giving birth to children anymore.
Yeah.
So yeah. But I think there's like a bigger deaf community in Grand Rapids, which is about an hour away, but I don't really know much about it. But I do advertise that I know some sign language. So I'm hoping that it would give me some understanding of the deaf culture, and that they would feel like somewhat seeing with me. We would still be an interpreter. Because we want to make sure that every disabled doula has full access to communication, because we know that when you feel unsafe, when you have barriers in communication, that can like mess up the birth hormone and shut down and slow down labor. So one of the things I did for my second birth was in July 2020. This is an example of how it's important to ask your disabled clients if there's anything that they want to address in the birth space before it happened. So I asked my OB practice, which was also a midwife practice, if they'd be willing to wear a clear mask. I would buy it. So I said, I just need you to wear a clear mask so I can lip read you and, not worry about not missing
Yeah.
something or whatever. And they were like, I'm not sure. I need to check. And I was like, I understand. Like, I don't usually switch it out a mask, but I think they
Yeah.
had to like check with hospital policy. I have no idea. But then eventually later on, I switched to a home birth. Because at the time the hospitals were not sure if they were allowed doulas. And it was like, I want my doula there.
Yeah.
So I switched to a home birth. And then I asked my home birth midwives and my doula to wear a clear mask if they'd be willing to wear it. And they were like, yeah, sure, no problem. See, that's a difference. Like, that made me feel seen. Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And that made a difference at the birth space. There's like some photos of the doulas and the midwives wearing clear masks and celebrating with me. And they were helpful at times, especially there was times during labor, I was like struggling. And then I looked at the doula and she like read to me, you got this. So like I would totally miss that, like without a mask,
Yes. Yeah.
Or when they announced the baby's weight, we all celebrated. And it was sad because they were wearing a mask and I missed it and everybody celebrated and I didn't.
Oh,
I just
yes.
birthed the baby. And the baby was
Yeah.
10 pounds, 5 ounces, by the way. So
Gorgeous.
everybody was
Juicy
surprised.
baby.
I was too. But so yeah, so
Lovely.
that's what it is like addressing, okay, how can we increase access in the birth space? What does that look like? Do we need to make arrangement with the providers ahead of time? What that might look like? And what does it look like as far as supporting the clients? So like as doulas, we like recommend different like birth positions. There's some birth positions that might be a problem for some people with mobility challenges,
Of course.
or they are like limbless or whatever. Then we have to think, okay, what are those movements doing to our hips? Or what are they doing to our pelvis? What other movements can we do to do the same thing, basically, in a different way? And then so things like that.
Yeah, there is a lot to consider, and like especially with with COVID and just like with the masks, I think that must have been so isolating for incredibly isolating. I know, I have no experience, but I know my dad is getting on, and he has hearing aids now, and when during COVID as well, like if his hearing aid wasn't working properly, and he was in the supermarket, he was like couldn't understand anything that was going on. It's awful and you really feel vulnerable, but and I'm hoping they're never coming back. These masks, touch wood. So if let's say you were speaking to another doula here who has some kind of disability, what words of encouragement would you offer if she was considering becoming a doula or is just getting started?
Yeah, so I would say like take care of your body, because only you know your body. And as a disabled person, we all have different like capabilities, like as far as like you have a chronic illness or like if you're autistic or whatever it is, or you're deaf or whatever, you know how much your body can handle. We don't want to have our body work so hard that we burn out our body and take longer to recover. So if you take care of your bodies, it will help us serve more clients. So what that means, okay, I know my body can only handle like 2 clients a month or 1 client a month or 4 or whatever. And that's what I mean, that with this sustainability is just more than just money. It's also like making sure our body, what we're doing, is sustainable long term for so what that means is that when you are in the consult with a client, it's up to you if you want to disclose your disability or not. Some disability are invisible, so you can get away with it, and some disability are not, so you might have to address that because unfortunately our society has ableism ingrained in it, so we have to tackle on any concerns that we think they may have. And then we might set up realistic expectations. So we know for every doula it might look different. So some clients want more physical support. Some clients want, or my partner's amazing, my partner can do all the physical support. I need the emotional support. Like as a disabled client, we can definitely do that. So, and for some disabilities, like I can still do hip squeezes and things like that. But for some others, that might be challenging, but you can find workarounds. Like we know tricks with a scarf and how to make that hip squeeze a little easier, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then another thing I also think it's also important as a disabled client, as a disabled doula is, oh my gosh, my brain is really tired this morning. Is to like think about the heart of doula is equitable support. So as a disabled client, we know how challenging those barriers are. So we want to make sure that we're removing barriers for ourselves or navigating around them and being honest with the clients with what they are and how it might impact them in the birth space. But also turn around to something positive. So like what I do is I kind of do like good news, bad news, good news sandwich, even though I don't think my disability is bad news. I think it's good news. I think there's some death perks for sure. But but what I do is like so I usually bring up my disability at the end of the consult. So after I like blow them away with my schmeal or whatever, then I say, I just want to let you know I am born deaf, so I have glaucoma in both ears. I feel like it makes me a better doula because I already have an advocate for myself in a world that's not made for me. So I think it translates well in the doula work that you have an advocate to help advocate for you by asking questions or whatever it is in a world that may not support a physiological birth or a birth that's like empowering or something like that. So that can translate well. And then they're usually like, oh, that's really cool. Thanks, whatever. So, and then you find out later if they hire you or not. And that's okay. You're not going to be the doula for everybody. You kind of be true to yourself. You don't want to like erase a part of your identity just to like make other people comfortable.
No.
Sometimes disability makes people uncomfortable, and that's just part of society programming or whatever. So disability is just a word. It's a neutral term. There's no positive or negative connotation. It's just a thing. So not a big deal.
Yeah. No, I like that. Not a big deal. Yeah. Now I know someone's going to reply back and say it is a big deal, but it really depends on how you frame it, I guess, for yourself. And then, I'm assuming like, with today's society, you have to keep reframing it based on kind of things are a little bit.
Yeah. I kind of disability, at the donor conference, we talked about Abby, the other presenter, and Dr. Abby Ferguson and I were talking about the social model of disability, where the medical model talks about something is off with your body, where the social model is like the barriers that you come through because of your ability. So it's not so much your problem. The problem isn't that your disability, it's a problem society is not accommodating to who you are. They're having access due to a default assumption of what your abilities are. And they're all assuming that you are body able, that you're hearing, that you are white, that you're a male or a woman, and that you are not LGBTQ, or that you don't have any mental health issues or anything like that. So they're all making assumptions about what you have the ability to do. So whereas like it's kind of like that in the illustration where we watch you where they have the three people watching the baseball game, or we want equitable support would be like making sure the short person has like a stool or whatever. But for me, what social model disability is like, well, let's just remove the fence, so we all have access to watching the football. That's like liberation to me. So we all can watch the baseball game, so we all can experience birth as it is, and it's beautiful and everything, without any like barriers to that.
Well said. Yep. If you could go back to your 18-year-old self and give yourself one piece of advice, Kristen, what would it be?
I think I would probably tell myself, like, you have something you contribute in the world, because I think as 18-year-old, you kind of think, and I was kind of thinking, like, well, I don't really have anything to offer. I don't know, like, I'm just a kid, but like, you are enough. Like, you don't have to prove yourself. You have a place. You are worth the space that you take up in this world, and Yeah, so you definitely have something to like provide to the world, and you are a gift and everything. So just hang in there.
Yeah.
We'll get better, kind of thing. So,
And
yeah.
you are worthy, I think
Yeah.
that's really important, that, especially when you're, go back to your 18-year-old self. Kristen, it's been lovely to chat to you and learn more about your work in Michigan. Will you tell me where everyone can find you? And we will, of course, include all of this in the show notes, but tell us where people can find you and what services you offer.
So my website is Kristen Schell, so it's KristenSchell birth.com. And then on Instagram and Facebook, I'm Kristen Schell Birth Services, and on TikTok, I'm Kristen Schell Birth.
Lovely.
Yeah, you can follow me on those. I try to keep up with my social media, and if you go to any of my links in my profiles and my website, you can find a link about the Birth Equity Fund, and on there'll be a link to my Etsy shop. And
great.
on that page, you can subscribe to emails, so where I can give you updates wherever there's new products on the Etsy shop too.
Great. And do you have anything in your Etsy shop right now? Since
There's
it's holiday season is coming.
There's a few things, but it's mostly like they're poop related. So they're like like a postpartum body birth, a planter, and it's like baby with placenta things on there, but there's definitely more coming. Yeah.
Lovely. Okay, well, we'll include all the details in the show notes. Thank you so much, Kristen, for joining me this morning. And thanks everybody for joining in. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe, and we'll share more content like this with you. Thank you so much, Kristen. Have a good rest of your day in Michigan.
Thanks. You too.